Hi all, this is Louis and I am here with Vic. Thank you so much, Vic, for taking a time to talk with us and in AI evolutions. And maybe just to kick us off, would you mind telling us about yourself and yeah, and particularly something that I've been curious about your background is from starting out from researcher, doing engineers, and then moving on as a venture capitalist. Can you walk us through your journey?
Yeah, absolutely. First off, thanks so much for having me here, and really exciting to speak to this crowd. Uh, my my current role, I'm a partner at Gradient, and I've been at Gradient for about 2.5 years. But before becoming a VC, I spent about a decade working on various problems in machine learning and distributed systems as a engineer and researcher. Um, Most recently, I was over at Microsoft and was working on building out intersection of machine learning and distributed systems work for Azure, the cloud computing platform. Part of that, I did my PhD in machine learning over at Stanford and worked on a variety of different techniques to improve the efficiency of compute specifically. So large scale computations, whether it was in financial exchanges or gaming servers or in large web servers that people run, using machine learning to solve some of the problems that we see in those categories still. And the other couple of journeys that I had were in startups. So I worked on two startups. Both were spun out of academic research in machine learning. The first was spun out of MIT, where we use a lot of interesting work in choice modeling to help large scale retailers better make decisions about what kind of products to put in front of their customers. And that kind of spanned the gamut of online, so doing recommendation systems for large retailers before there were a lot of offerings doing that, and also doing supply chain optimization, so infusing data science into those kinds of capabilities. So the second startup I worked on was a distributed systems company, or is a distributed systems company that got spun out of Stanford. And that company is working on building better protocols and primitives for large scale computations, specifically some of the large scale clusters we see for AI training and inference right
Mm.
now. It's been an exciting path, and I would say the most incredible thing is having been able to watch how quickly that field seemed to have been moving, even a decade ago, but now seeing how quickly it's moving, it's really exhilarating.
See, that is fascinating experience and building on top of this, coming from the other side of the table as a venture capitalist, when you see company like in your portfolio, CTGT is obviously a research-backed company. When you how do you know when a research breakthrough is ready to become a real product in enterprise environment?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think that there's a few things that, I would say are meaningful, at least to me, in terms of
Mm-hmm.
coming across these kinds of spin-outs or, pieces of work that build upon an academic corpus or body of research. I think one of the first things that I try to think about is whether or not the problem being solved is truly a bottleneck in the process. So is it the most meaningful thing? Is it the hair on fire problem that people are
Mm-hmm.
looking for a remedy for? And in that way, I don't think it's too far off from, vertical SaaS. And again, like you need a pressing problem and you need a specific moment in time in which a piece of technology hits the market. But what that really means in a few of the cases where I've worked with academics and or former academics is there are some problems that clearly present uh, this kind of like representation. And I think that one is there's been an ongoing bottleneck in the ability for folks to get the most out of the compute and underlying compute substrates that they're
Mm-hmm.
allocating, whether it's for inference or training again. Now we're starting to see that shift a bit more into energy demands and the TCO that data center operators and folks have to deal with as they spin up much larger clusters, and the chips that each generation that we see it's getting 50% plus um, uh, higher in terms of the demands that they place on the energy
I
that
see.
operate them. Um,
Mm-hmm.
but I think that's like one aspect is where is the bottleneck right now, or in the
Mm-hmm.
term immediate future. And I think the second thing to keep an eye on in terms of where enterprises may look to adopt or be willing to take a chance on an early product that's been formulated from this research is, are you either improving the bottom line of an organization directly by selling this product? And I think if you think about OpenAI was a research uh, breakthrough in terms of them being able to train larger and larger transformers. At a certain point, the breakthrough is you could automate a lot of the work, like a good amount of the work that people are doing right
Mm-hmm.
now in specific categories. So in that case, it's very clearly a bottom line improvement in terms of not having to, have headcount that's potentially twice as large to do what you're looking to do right now. The second aspect is how do you mitigate risk, right? So like there's upside from improving the bottom line, and there's also a second thing, which is the downside. How do you mitigate risk that may be present? And that was what got me excited about CTGT in particular.
Mm-hmm.
And it's what makes me broadly interested in AI safety, which is these the models that people are adopting and the tools that they're using to do so are being granted larger and larger sets of permissions around the information that an organization or enterprise will expose to those models. Models are getting more capable and more efficient, but also getting harder to understand. And I think this is a widely, understood, or at least like widely remarked kind of phenomena. But all of these three things kind of point to a setting in which the models that we have now or in the near term future will have access to a lot of information. Will have agency to read and write over a large set of the workflows and tools that we read and write from as humans, and it will be harder and harder to interface or directly understand exactly what choice was made and what choice was made by these models. So all of that points towards this kind of category of like protecting against the downside, where
Mm-hmm.
if there if there are issues, how do you resolve them? How do you interpret what the model is doing, and how do you safeguard with that understanding for future issues that could arise?
I see. That that really interesting. And we start to see this sort of companies coming out from the research back papers a lot more comparing to the past, and the speed is really fast, right?
Absolutely, yeah. It's a far more common thing than even a few years ago.
Mhm. Yeah, shifting gear a little bit, when it comes to piloting to production in the environment, enterprise environment, with all the AI infrastructure, well-known companies in your portfolio like Lambda, CTGTs, and also even the successful exit of ZenML to NVIDIA. What are some of the common characteristics or patterns that you see in these successful AI infrastructure companies?
Yeah, I think the first and foremost point I would make is it's very meaningful to be in the critical path of training or inference. And
Mm-hmm.
what I mean is there's I think everyone's aware of the outputs that are achieved from these models in terms of the tokens that are coming out. Tokens are going in and tokens that are coming out. There's across the infrastructure path, I think that the folks that have benefited the most and have grown the most and produced the most value have really been in this path from the earliest stages, the inception, to how you get those tokens out of those models. And I'll give you some examples. Um, there's um, even let's start with the neoclouds themselves, the folks that are
Yeah.
renting GPUs. They're obviously a core part of the equation. If you start in the neoclouds themselves, then you have the chips. So there are chip companies and other chip companies outside of NVIDIA and AMD that have grown significantly in valuation, and we've seen that too. But they're part of the equation and they're part of that path. The second thing is energy to power those chips. Third is data center leases in which like folks would likely like to be co-located near a large source of energy. After that, you have core software, right? Or sorry, after that, I should say you have data. So data of all sorts and forms has emerged as a really meaningful market in the infrastructure space, right? And there are companies that are working on general, human data labeling. There are companies that are working on very specific domains. And now a lot of the attention is on, a form of data that I think a lot of people refer to it as expert data. So very specialized information on core domains that are very high value for specific, at the end of the day, like vertical AI companies. So data in accounting, finance, and so on. But that's like the data category. Also in this, what I'm referring to as a critical path. After data, you then have the models themselves, which are a product of the compute, the data, and what you need to actually to run. After the models, you have the core serving infrastructure, and SentinelML was a piece of that core serving infrastructure, which is the compiler stack and the ability to translate a model into a set of kernels that would then run on the GPUs. So core serving stack or core training stack, like weights and biases, is another example of a company that was acquired by CoreWeave. It was an experimentation platform that allowed you to train and understand the multitudes of checkpoints that you would train models for. And after that, a software stack to both train and infer. We then have something which is, in some cases, like a security product. You have a set of guardrails or you have a set of constraints around the outputs or inputs that might go to those kinds of models. And we have one company called Vigil that works in that space, and there's a few others, like Protect AI was a company that was recently acquired, but also had a similar kind of purpose, which was to help protect against the downside risks of transferring things like PII to these models and stuff like that. The entirety of my point here is that there is, in my view, a lot of the value in the infrastructure side has accrued to this critical path from all the way from the intent to server model to actually doing it.
I see. And when you think about it comparatively, do you see the value accrue the most to the bottom layers, or would you say that it's also like evenly distributed?
I think it's a good question. In general, like I think the historical, thing that we've seen in prior cycles has been the lower level cycles you are, and if you're at the lowest levels of that kind of value chain that we just described, you tend to have larger moats. You need more CapEx to disrupt those categories, but at the same time, you have lower margins. These are lower margin businesses typically. What I think is interesting and has changed a lot now is you have companies like NVIDIA with 70% plus gross margins, right? Like this is really, really high for historical hardware, right? So I think that the equation, in my view, has changed a little bit in that it does look like a very strong place to be when you are in those lower levels of that value chain. But at the same time, and in that case, like you have more of a moat, but simultaneously have very good gross margins. So I think in this specific cycle, it seems to be the case that it does look like a very attractive place to be. Of course, so I think the limiting factor there is there's not that many teams that you can find be able to, an AI accelerator, compute accelerator that with the likes of, of the names that we know.
I see. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. And I think maybe shifting the layer up a little bit, I think when it comes to enterprise AI adoptions, obviously we all heard about the MIT report on um, the that the AI agents in the enterprise environment, most of them actually seem to be failed. And what do you believe are the sort of missing piece in the enterprise that make them be able to capture the strong ROI from deploying these AI agents?
Yeah, it's a really good report, and it's a very good read. The
Mm-hmm.
MIT report that you're referring to. I think that there's a few. I have a couple of comments around that. I think the first is that, I think that there are some issues that have been faced when some of these startups try to sell to enterprises broadly. And I think in many of these cases, what's being referred to just by the sheer number is probably more, those numbers probably lean more or sample more from the application side relative to the infrastructure side. But in that kind of scope, what I would say is it's interesting to look at where the successes have been relative to the 95% failures, that have been documented, at least within that study. And I think if you look at the successes, then you get a picture for some of the things that are referenced in the report, for why things are breaking down, and maybe some ways that startups could um,
Mm-hmm.
position the product offering and the go-to-market motion. And I'll give you a couple of things that, I've seen, which is I think the first thing to call out is it's hard to not be aware of the PLG motion having such a large effect in terms of the outsized startups that we've seen today in the application space. And one example of that I think everyone is aware of is a company like Cursor or Windsurf,
Mm-hmm.
which is an AI coding assistant. And in that case, it is a self-serve product. Anybody can go sign up for it, put their credit card in, and immediately they're able to, perform the generative code tasks that they might want to do. And that succeeded really well. In other categories too, you have companies like Granola that are doing very, very well, that offer AI note taking. But again, it's the same kind of formula for user adoption.
Mm-hmm.
So that is, I think, the one of the things that we've seen work really well. But on the, I guess, the side that's tandem to it, when you're selling into enterprises and going top down, my feeling about that is that in some cases, like the capabilities and what people really want out of their AI tools, it's very hard to manage this gap when there's a distinct buyer, when there's a buyer that's distinct from the user, right? In some cases, that's what you would do. You would sell to maybe a CTO or CISO, whereas um, their ability to potentially judge or gauge the best possible tool,
Mm-hmm.
it's probably still going to be a really great assessment.
Mm-hmm.
But the people who are using the tool, they're going to have a lot more firsthand experience, and I think they are the ultimate set of people who are able to discern the minute differences between some of these offerings, and in some cases, like what helps them get their work done faster, right? Which is the end goal that everyone really has. Um, the other thing that I think that I've seen is there's a lot of companies that have been spun up that are trying to attach services along with the product, or the product that's being offered. And we've seen this like in larger consulting companies like Accenture is booking tons of, at least what's reported is they're booking tons of AI service revenue, right? You take
Mm-hmm.
off-the-shelf products, you do some things like you do some data munging and ETL, and like you maybe build some integrations that you might need into internal systems. You align folks on what kind of workflows would be ideal for that given organization. And we've also seen some companies that are either being funded by VCs or have been incubated and started by VCs
Mm-hmm.
that are also going after this kind of approach. And I think that in my view, the symptom that kind of points me towards is in some cases it's very hard to align an organization around a common goal in terms of like the ideal workflow that needs to be achieved, um,
Mm-hmm.
especially when you're not in the room with them, right? When you're not having even and very detailed conversations with them, it's hard to, from a few 30-minute sales pitches or however long you might be taking, like it's very hard to get a sense for exactly the manifestation of the product that fits that organization particularly.
Mm-hmm.
So I think those are kind of the two issues I see where like in some cases like the users are more aware or more informed about exactly what will help them get their work done.
Mm-hmm.
And secondly, every organization is different. There are, especially when
Yeah.
you're across quite a few different potentially silos. So in those cases, like sometimes services are needed to bridge that gap.
Mm-hmm.
Like, and those have been cases that look like they have been successful
Mm-hmm.
in many of those opportunities.
I see. It's interesting on your note that the PLGs, which is actually from the traditional SaaS world, is carried to the world of AI, and
Yeah.
also it seems like the organization problem as well when it comes to adopting these AI agents in enterprise. I think maybe just to shifting gear a little bit to a more future oriented um, question. I think first of all, want to congratulate you on the successful fundraising from spinning out from Google, and we are honored to be one of your LP as well. Just the basic questions: what are the sectors or AI application infrastructure you are excited to invest at the moment, or what are you excited about right now?
Yeah, absolutely. And just before that, we're honored too, I should say. And in terms of the things that we're really, or at least like I'll speak for myself, like one of the great things about I think our team in particular is that we have people that come from a very different set of backgrounds. So I think the things that, I might be excited about might not be exciting to,
Yeah.
the team and vice versa, but
Mm-hmm.
it's something where we learn together. And I think that in my view, things that are exciting of a lot of excitement to me right now, or particularly there's a few things I think that again going back to that bottleneck question, like I'm looking at quite a few opportunities to invest in companies that will meaningfully improve the total capacity and like the efficiency of energy and energy
Mm-hmm.
production, US or otherwise. The second category of things that I'm looking at is the companies that are pursuing drug discovery or material science applications. In a lot of those applications, you have a similar um, kind of end goal problem, which is you like to find a specific molecule or material that meets some set of requirements. I think that the things that make it quite interesting to me at this moment in time is that there's a few things. Like one is there's a moat. There's a very distinct set of moats in those categories. So specifically in both those cases, you have patent filings and the ability to
Mm-hmm.
server market. In many cases, server market undisturbed, right?
Mm-hmm.
Second thing beyond that is that you have AI making meaningful differences
Mm-hmm.
to that discovery process. And I think just yesterday there was a really phenomenal result about, you know, actually by I think it was by Google DeepMind, where folks were looking at a specific set of readings about a type of cancer and trying to understand some of the conjectures or hypotheses about why a certain reading might exist, and the model that they had trained actually was very meaningfully helping them through that process. But we've seen many of these stories, I think, and uh, there is, I think historically it's been a situation in which, to continue the analogy of, reducing the bottom line, there's been a situation in which you hire a very, very large number of scientists to run experiments and go through the scientific process. So generate hypotheses, design experiments, go through the experiments, collect data, and then go through this loop, over and over and over again. And I think that AI as an ability to lever that process is really exciting, in that you might need fewer scientists and you're able to run far more experiments very quickly and gather more data. That is another really exciting component of that. So uh, those are a few of the things that I'm really interested in at the moment, where still in the early days of all of the above categories I talked about, but the early signs that we're seeing in all those categories are just really phenomenal.
Yeah, it seems really deep text and I would imagine that there are only a few people who have the intersections of understandings of AI and at the same time understandings of all these like energy densities and material science, right?
Yeah. I mean, I'm learning as I go, and it's been a really fun process to do that. But it is really great to be able to understand what the limitations of the models are, because that is a limitation in a lot of these fields. So it's something where you can potentially gain conviction on something and underwrite technology risks that where you might have an understanding of what's
Hmm.
happening in that space, where in some cases you might not be able to. So for those reasons, I think what you're saying is exactly right. It's really exciting to see what's happening in those categories.
Yeah, really interesting. I think the other things that I would like to ask is sort of the build with all these build out of CapEx investments like from the hyperscalers and also many of the neo clouds. I think one of the questions that definitely pops up to people around the world, whether you are investors in public or private, is are we in the bubbles or how do you go from here? And maybe I'm curious about your take on that.
Yeah, it's a really good question. Honestly, I think that it's a question that a lot of people ask themselves. I ask myself, this too, and I think specifically in the capex build out. The I think there's two paths that fork out, and in one path, we have continuous model improvement, and models get to the point in which they're able to um, really faithfully and reliably perform a lot of the tasks that are make up the GDP of our nation, many nations around the world, right? In that case, it's if you if we are on that path that forks out that way, then I do not think that we're in a bubble in terms
Mm-hmm.
of the irrational ideas of in terms of the capex buildup being an irrational idea. And if we're in the other path where for some reason or another we hit a wall, if that's the case, then it's hard for me to argue that we aren't, right?
Mm-hmm.
So what I've seen so far, and from what I understand so far, um, the capabilities that we've seen and the techniques that have been constructed and the capital that surrounds, and again, I think this goes back to the entire like critical path, because the critical path is everything, every single ingredient is really needed. Um, if you can get more out of your GPUs with better compilers, if you can get more data and more interesting data and more novel data that outperforms the state of the art that we have
Mm-hmm.
right now, those are all incredibly important things to staying on the first path, the first fork in the road. And
Mm-hmm.
from what I've seen, I don't believe that we've witnessed like model capabilities stopping.
Mm-hmm.
Even um, to take the converse side of it, like I think they've actually been accelerating in certain categories for sure.
Yeah, that's really fascinating. And actually, as we wrap up, I think what is some of your advice for the enterprise leader that trying to separate AI signal from the noise, especially adopting all these AI inside organizations? What are some of the advice for them for the last 1 minute?
Yeah, something that I've heard some larger companies do, and what I think is a really great way to go about it, and it's honestly something that we do a lot internally, like beyond trying to understand the technology in the markets, like we use a lot of these tools and try to understand in cases where they're appropriate. what is actually significant and what is not for the day to day. Something I've seen some enterprise leaders do to that regard is you give people a budget per month to try out a
Mm-hmm.
set of whatever can help your day to day, and you get information on
Mm-hmm.
what kind of things will work. So
I see.
I think it's a great thing to do.
That's a really great ending. Thank you so much, Vic, for taking the time and talking to us. Yeah.
Really appreciate it. Thank you so much for
Yeah.
having me.
So good one, Vic.
Thank you.